Good evening, fans. Tim Kitzrow here, the voice of NBA Jam, and you're listening to the Game Dev Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by CodeWritePlay.com. Whoa, boom shakalaka.
My mom gave birth in 1985. I was bluer than a Pac-Man ghost, barely alive. In the Cold War, my only blanket was Tetris. I played Rampart with Reagan, rampaged the world for breakfast. The laundromat was my sanctuary, that arcade was my church. I thought I was
Okay, my desk is creaking. That's going to be worse for me than you later. I'm trying to edit. Cool. Okay, well, great. Well, John, thank you so much for jumping on a call. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am okay. Thanks for
having me here. This is it's great to be here and great to meet you and get to talk about video games and law and all that stuff.
Yeah, thank you for jumping on this so quick. I only contacted you yesterday?
Yeah, I'm well, I'll tell you about my story, but I'm kind of in an outreach mode. So, I'm excited to be able to talk to you and to talk to the folks that listen and watch this podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, you've been really working hard on getting yourself out there, and you've been doing it in interesting ways by covering recent news stories along your expertise. To start, why don't we have you sort of introduce yourself and your work?
So my name is John Loiterman. I am the principal attorney at my law firm, JBL Law, and I have an interesting background and please cut me off if I'm going on too long about this. But I'm a lawyer from Chicago. I practiced as a litigator and a transactional attorney in the healthcare field for about 10 years. And it was sort of balanced between defending doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies in liability litigation and doing sort of regulated transactions for the healthcare sector. And it's through that I came to the cannabis industry. So in 2014, Illinois passed cannabis legislation in Illinois.
Right.
I resigned from my firm. I founded a cannabis company. As a lawyer, this was a sort of even though it's a cannabis company, it's like a cutting edge legal issue. And I came at it from a healthcare standpoint. And I founded this company. I raised money for it. I operated it in Illinois and Oregon for about 7 years. And in January of last year, exited the company. We sold out. I got out of the cannabis business for a lot of reasons I won't get into. I don't really want to have anything to do with the cannabis industry anymore. And so in terms of what I do with my career, I didn't want to take the next logical step, which was to go to work for a bigger cannabis company than the one that I had been operating before. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to go back to a law firm. I really felt like video games is my calling, and it had been for a long time. I worked at a studio called High Voltage Software in Hoffman Estates as a tester, as a teenager. But I wasn't that good of a programmer, and I didn't see like how test was going to get me into the kind of position that I wanted to be in the games industry. And I kind of, didn't do that well in the computer science classes that I took in college. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to be a lawyer. And, obviously I did that for many years. And I was in a legally related executive position that involved a lot of employment stuff and fundraising. And so when I left, I'm sort of looking at myself like, well, I have this broad range of legal and business skills in terms of organizing businesses, raising money for them, dealing with disputes, dealing with employees, dealing with intellectual property and trademarks and all these different kind of things. And so if I'm looking at this like I want to be in the video game industry. And I wasn't sure exactly how that was going to be. And so I started off just building games on my own. Nice. And so I built, I started using the Pico 8 tool set. Which I thought was maybe something that you wanted to talk about, and Pico 8 is definitely
totally
something. I built some games with Pico 8. I released one called Pico Fender. It's sort of a remix of Defender. I'm into the old arcade games, and in so doing, I came to be a part of the game development community, and this is really what is appealing to me about the games industry. It's not that I have some grand vision about a particular video game that I want to make. It's that I want to be part of the game development community. I want to work with other game developers. And thinking about where I'm coming from is like, yeah, I know how to program and I can do some art and design and stuff. But, I spent, 15 years working as a lawyer and as an executive. And so if I want to add value and I want to be useful to people in the game development industry, the way for me to approach that is to lean into what I do, which is, the legal and the business and the financial side of things. And so I've been trying to put myself out there and just be useful for people. And part of doing that, it connected me with the International Game Developers Association. I was selected as part of the 2022 virtual exchange velocity program. And so it's connected me with a lot of other developers. And so I am meeting developers and learning about their experiences and sharing some of my experiences and representing small developers and trying to find ways to make legal services affordable and accessible to independent game developers, startup game developers. Because, you look around the world, you look around the industry, it's, those people are getting screwed left and right. And it's because I get it, right? If you have $20,000, $50,000, or you're totally bootstrapping a game, you don't have money to pay for lawyers. But if your game takes off, you're not protected. If you get a publishing deal and you haven't sought, professional consultation, you're likely to get abused by a publisher that is interested in just taking your thing and making as much possible and giving you nothing. And so this is an opportunity for me to reach out and get to be known by game developers so that I can help them and find ways to make legal services more accessible and more affordable for this class of developer, where I think it's really a crisis of underrepresentation in the industry, and it's something I want to do something about.
Like you said, a lot of developers are starting at zero, literally at zero, and going, if I can turn this into a studio and, make solo development work, that's great. I started that way. And the idea of having to contact a lawyer is scary. Like for those people in that situation, it's like, at almost every step, right? Because it's like, when do I incorporate? What happens if I do well? And a publisher does come knocking. Like, there are a lot of business practices that we don't know about. Things I've learned from, like, my wife happens to work in healthcare, and she worked in healthcare in Illinois while you worked there. In other industries, it's extremely common for, hey, either an employer wants to hire me or I've got this contract to look at. Those people talk to lawyers. And for us, it's like, I could try that, but I don't know anything about it. So I think it's neat that you're trying to find ways to ease people into the concept and also to, like, make it financially work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to find ways to make it financially work. Part of this is education. I think a lot of people think that, they don't understand the value that the lawyer gives them because they don't necessarily see how it plays out in the real world. And so it's one of the things about talking about stories in the news. And I posted on LinkedIn about, the Mick Gordon story, and there's been the thing with Helena Taylor from Bayonetta, and all these different things that go on behind the scenes that, the media doesn't cover that because it's a little bit too inside baseball for gamers and consumers. But developers, it's important for them to see what happens and for them to understand the value that a lawyer can give to them. And one of the things that I like that I find really exciting about the games industry, and as a place for indies and startups, is that if you look at the history of labor and capital in America, for the most part, you had businesses that in the middle 20th century, most people that were working, if you were building a car or you were working in a coal mine or something, right? Like, you couldn't do your thing on your own. You had to have somebody that had, a factory with steel and rubber and all the different things that you need to make a car. Or if a coal mine, somebody has the real estate or whatever. In the video game industry, it's almost pure human capital crystallized down to something that's monetizable, because you can have two or three people that are working on tools that they have at their home, and they can build $1 billion franchise with that. That's totally unprecedented in the history of the world and the history of the economy, that you can have that much leverage from a small number of people. And so there's just not a lot of, generally the software business has this feature in particular, but video games have this kind of universal appeal where like anybody could be sitting on a gold mine. Anybody could be sitting on the next Minecraft or Angry Birds or, Floppy Bird or whatever you want, or Wordle, right? Small developers can do big things in this world. And when they do, it's terrible to see them get taken advantage of by big money and big business. And so it's a reason why I think that the legal community and the investment community also has underestimated indie game dev and the value that it can add and the value that it can create in the future, especially as we're seeing these tectonic shifts in, the world and business and commerce moving online into interactive digital spaces in a way that hasn't ever happened before. So it's an exciting time to be part of the video games industry as it expands, and the boundaries between what is a video game and what is a industrial application starts to erode.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because we have this refrain in indie development where they go, "Don't worry about your ideas because it's the work behind it that makes the product," which is a good motivator. It's a good thing to say, like, don't hesitate to participate in the community and, connect with the other developers around you. But the truth is, we are starting to see a trend where indies do come up with those hits, your Minecrafts and your PUBGs and things like that. And we're starting to see big studios swoop in, clone it, and run. And it's like, where do we even go from there if the indie dream is try to benefit from this thing you made before someone crushes it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's and as a business guy and a strategist, I think about, what indie devs, what they're facing. And it's the reality is that if you're Epic or Microsoft or Sony or whatever, they are technically capable of doing anything that the indie dev can. And so if you're an indie dev, like you're playing guerrilla warfare game. You have to do in order to win this asymmetric battle and to outcompete, these huge companies that are making games. You have to do things not that they're not capable of, but things that they have incentives not to do. And so if you look at what AAA is all about, is they have to spend so much money to compete at the AAA level. And when they do, it means they have to be really cautious about what they do because they can't alienate anyone. They have to have this huge audience. And so the indie devs, they have to do a fine line because on the one hand, like indie devs have the freedom and the relatively low risk to go in a different direction and do something new and interesting. At the same time, consumers don't necessarily want new. They want something they can understand. And so if it's too new, well, then they don't know what it is and they can't understand it. And so, you have to be different enough to stand out, but not so different that people can't understand what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to watch it play out, over and over again as games change and, preferences change in the player base and everything. But this interests me about your work because I think a lot of attorneys would go, I want to find, a high profit area to practice with simple issues. And I feel like you have the opposite here. Especially if you were to, you're reaching out to small developers so far. And I don't know what you want the practice to look like later, but, this is an area with low budgets and what seem to me to be very complicated problems. Is that accurate?
They're complicated problems, but they, fit a few different molds. And I think that the issue is, obviously, right. There's a certain amount of risk in not getting paid from developers that go bust, and it's something that I understand and I have to account for in how I run my business. But I think a lot of it is just a matter of time shifting. A lot of lawyers will say like, okay, you got to pay me a retainer. So before I even talk with you or help you with your problem, you've got to pay me all this money that I can keep and then bill against as I earn. But like, you've got to put all this money in up front, when the developers are looking at it from the opposite perspective, which is like, I'm working on this thing that has a lot of value, but I can't monetize it until it's released. Mm-hmm. And so the devs need services now, and they, hopefully are going to be able to pay later. There's a certain, and so I would say this about, it's something that I'm able to do that maybe not a lot of lawyers are, which is to say like, I'm not interested in spending a lot of time on non-viable products that don't have an audience, with people that don't have a plan for how they're going to do any of this stuff, and then hope that they're successful to get paid. So I have to be on one hand, I have to be picky about who I work with. On the other hand, I'm being very generous in terms of the education that I can provide to people and the stuff that I put out and the various forums that I make myself available to people for free. So I have, free consultation. So anybody that is an indie game developer, you can at least sit down with me and get like the general framework and talk to me about some things and figure out where you need to be. And so there are a lot of things that I can help out with people just by being a nice guy without, representing them. And that's stuff that I definitely want to do. And I want to try to benefit the indie game community beyond just my clients. I would like to, my goal is to try to create an environment where there is more incentive for creativity in the games industry. I'm hoping that there is something like a golden age in video games coming up over the next 5 to 10 years. And the reason I think that might happen is because, you've got a lot of players with a lot of money are entering this space. They're coming at it from different angles, but like, Meta has the Quest and they're doing all this metaverse software. And so they're kind of entering the game space in a way that they haven't been, it was one thing when they're hosting Farmville having, the Meta Quest platform is quite another. Amazon is entering the space. Google had Stadia. That didn't work out, but they still have the Google Play Store, and I'm sure that they've got other things that are brewing. Apple has the App Store, and they may have a VR thing coming, and they may have a bunch of other things that they're doing. Obviously, the big traditional players, you've got Valve. That's not, they've got the Steam Deck, and so there's all these companies that are spending money not just on developing games, but on developing platforms and bringing people into their ecosystem. And a lot of that money is going to end up with developers who are building things that are exclusive to those platforms, and that those companies are going to pay for exclusive stuff. Just the fact that there's a lot of investment coming in this, in my view, means that there's a lot of opportunity for developers, and there's a lot of opportunities for developers to create experiences that are innovative and use the features of these different hardware platforms, or that are incorporating, different commerce things, the various, Web3 and crypto and NFT kinds of things. I think there's, there are a bunch of legal issues with how that's been done. There's a bunch of legal issues yet to be resolved about that thing. But I think it's another area in which you're going to see more innovation. You're going to see something gel from all this investment with digital assets and crypto and things like this. And so it's another vector for investment in the games industry. And it's why, right, coming back to the legal stuff, is if you want to have your studio bought out, you can't just build a great game and then expect to be, you have to prepare for that in terms of how your business is organized, in terms of how you've protected your IP and assets, in terms of how you've covered the liabilities that you may have accumulated in the past. And so a lot of these things you have to kind of assume that you're going to be successful at the beginning, because if you wait until you are, if you wait until you have a hit, it's too late to figure this stuff out, and you're going to leave a lot of money on the table. And, gosh, for people that are working on a game for a year or 2 years and they get nothing, and if it's successful, they really want, you capture lightning in a bottle, you may never come again. And so, people really have to think carefully about how much of themselves they're investing in these games and all the different things that can go wrong.
It's interesting because you just came from cannabis, which was legally a brand new thing, where based on I tried to follow the news about that. I'm a million miles away from that issue, but I found it interesting in that, like, it's becoming legal for the first time in, Midwestern states, basically. And it seems like lawyers are kind of leading the way, and they're at least the ones in the best position to help navigate that. And it seemed like all the companies I had heard of that were getting into this space were either headed up directly by lawyers, or the lawyers were the ones with the map, because it sounded like the laws everywhere were extremely complicated. Everything was extremely weird. And now in certain ways, it seems like games are kind of doing the same thing. We don't know what crypto laws are going to end up looking like. We don't know if the metaverse will raise new issues,
I think, and it's something of the cannabis industry experience that I think is the fact that there is no playbook for what's coming, and that we're figuring it out as we go. I do think that there's something that's resonant about that in the games industry. One of the things that I think should be a lesson that I took out of the cannabis industry, and one of the reasons I don't really want to be involved in that is the extent to which the long arm of the government influences, or if sometimes dictates, what the competitive balance in industry is.
Right.
And so this is not it's going to become more of an issue for video games in the future, which is that as the government gets involved and regulates things, they tend to not regulate things in ways that are going to advantage the little guy. They tend to regulate things in ways that are going to advantage the big guys and the influential people and the folks that have control in government. And so video games is very nice in the sense that it's mostly, at least compared to cannabis, it's mostly unregulated. There's, obviously as a business, you have to pay your taxes and you've got employment, things like this. But in terms of what you make in your product and how you sell it, you have a lot of flexibility as a game developer that you don't have as a legal cannabis producer. And so I think it's the experience of running a highly regulated company. The games industry should beware about asking for various things to be regulated or controlled or standardized, because you may want that thing to help consumers or to help small developers or whatever, but in practice, it hardly ever works out that way. And so people, in my opinion, the games industry should be cautious about, we went through a little bit about this in the 90s with the ESRB and censorship in the industry. And the industry ultimately took a tactic, which was very smart, which said, we don't want government regulation. We're going to have our own thing. Right. And they're going to come up with these ratings. And it's been good. And basically, I don't know that the whole debate about censorship in video games has gone away, but the sort of this is poison for children, this is dangerous, that flavor of the conversation hasn't really existed since the 90s on a mainstream level because of the ESRB. And so, that's a good example about how the industry can get out in front of things and to prevent the government from getting involved, because I guarantee that whatever the government did would be much more difficult for game developers and publishers to deal with than the ESRB, which answers to the industry and not to normal political forces.
Yeah. What's funny is, and this government stuff didn't cross my mind to discuss today, but it does come up very naturally because I happen to be in the St. Louis area. Missouri has a number of politicians who are sort of making a name for themselves, trying to not focus on state issues, but go like, hey, look at me. Look what I'm going to tackle for you, the little man, and so this is one of the states where politicians have gone, we need to attack video games instead of a million issues that are way further up on the priority list, evil loot boxes and predatory, practices or whatever. And it's like, okay, I understand wanting to look out for, you know, especially in the case where it's like a kid has mom's cell phone and she's letting him play Candy Crush and he accidentally orders $150 worth of whatever. Yeah, that's bad. We've heard the stories, but like at the same time, like you said, if we jump into big, heavy-handed regulation on that, is it going to hurt King, who makes Candy Crush, or is it going to hurt me and my friends who tried to make a little mobile app? And now, because of the verbiage of the weird bill, because no one knew what they were talking about, now we are in hot water legally if we do almost anything. It's like, you'd have to explain to me how that's not a state politician attacking small business owners in that state. It's getting really weird.
I mean, I would say this, right? If there was going to be some regulation that comes out of the government that says, oh, well, this is how we're going to regulate microtransactions in video games. You know, in my experience, you can expect that legislation will be written by King's lawyers, not by the people that you think are protecting your interests. It's King's lawyers sitting down and telling the politicians, this is what the bill looks like, and you're going to pass it. And the idea that they're going to pay attention to consumers and things like that, that is just, you know, it's not how it works. Certainly in the cannabis industry, that's 100% how it worked. And I think if you look at energy and healthcare and pharmaceuticals and on and on and on in the economy, and every place where, you know, you need the government to give you the ticket in order to play the game, that, what do you know? There's only 5 companies that have the ticket and everybody else is scrubs and they can't play. Video games are not like that because you don't need the ticket from anyone. You don't have anyone to you know, the gatekeeper for video games is, can you make it? And, you know, at least on the PC, anybody can make anything and put it out there. You can have your own website hosted with your own server. As long as you have an ISP, you can put your thing out there without any restrictions. That is not true for a whole range of different industries. And so people in the game industry ought to cherish that and respect that, because, you know, we're quickly moving to although I think there's a golden age coming, there's a bunch of things to be concerned about the shape of that golden age, which is, you may have a situation where, well, now all the devices look like the iPhone, and, you know, the iPhone and the Quest, and now the PCs look more like they're running Apple Silicon, and they're running new versions of Windows that don't let you run anything. You can see a situation where it's like, gosh, unless you get your ticket stamped by one of these half a dozen giant companies, no one can play your game. That's the world that some companies want to exist in. And so it doesn't happen unless we, the big companies are never going to come out and say, this is our goal, is to consolidate all these things. They're going to sell it as, well, we want to protect you from microtransaction abuse, and we want to protect you from this and this and this. And that's how they sell it. But what you get is 5 companies that control everything. And so it's something the game development community, I think, should bear in mind as they ask or consider various things that might be regulated in the industry, is be careful what you wish for, because those rules are very unlikely to favor small business and small developers.
Yeah. And like you said, I think the education issue is important. I happen to be a nerd about legal stuff. I enjoy listening to, there are a couple of legal podcasts I listen to that have nothing to do with games. I don't know why. I've just always been interested in that kind of thing. But you've done a fantastic job of covering issues on, right now, it looks like your primary place for that is LinkedIn, where you're doing posts on, like you said, Bethesda, the Superman demo recently, the Bayonetta situation. And I would encourage people to follow that kind of content from an expert who understands the legal issues and can comment on, without being directly involved in it, having a sense of like, here's what you should be looking at. Here are the implications. Here's what it means. Because there is a lot to it. And I know you've only been on the current Twitter account for about a year, it looks like. Is that kind of thing a big part of your strategy? Are you going to branch out, maybe do some article writing around the web? Like, what's that going to look like for you?
I think, I'm sort of playing the content marketing playbook, which is, doing my thing and putting it out there and letting people know what it is that I do, because I do feel like it's not for the content is not for everybody, but there is, if you're a developer, if you care about the business of gaming, if you care about these legal issues, this is stuff that not a lot of people are talking about. You may get a discussion about, a news story about Mick Gordon or whatever in Kotaku or Polygon or what any of the big media sites, but they tend not to, cover the legal side of it in detail because most of their readers aren't interested in it and that. And I get it. But if you're a developer and not a consumer, you may be looking at this not like, oh, here's what's, the drama and these people getting mad at each other. It's like, what can I learn? How do I protect myself? And that's kind of the angle that I want to take, which is what is the takeaway from these things that happen in the news? How do if you're watching the Mick Gordon and id Software thing, I mean, I think if you're a developer, you don't want to be on either side of that. Yeah. And so there's, lessons to take away about publicity. There's lessons to take about how it's one of the other things that I feel like I can help people with is, I don't know about, Mick Gordon at his level, but like in Hollywood and in sports, talent they hire a lawyer to negotiate for them. And so that the lawyer and the negotiator can get tough with the trained lawyers and negotiators that the business have, and the creative can do what they do. And so I think a lot of times somebody might be a voice actor or a designer, and they're put in a position where they're on the other side of a negotiating table with a lawyer who's been negotiating with people every day for 20 years. And this is a person that's whatever, they're negotiating this thing and they're concerned about, well, I don't want to push too hard on this. And, I don't want to ask for this. Because they're concerned about how it's going to affect their professional and creative relationship with the studio. It's something that I can help with, which is, if you're negotiating a deal, get somebody in to get tough with them. If you're getting the raw end of, if you're a contract worker and, I don't know if what Mick Gordon said is true, but if it was, and I'm sure it happened to somebody where they keep moving the goalposts on you and they, when you agree to go on with it, then they're saying, oh, you agreed to all these things and they abuse that situation. It's something that I can help with for developers that really are like, hey, I'm in a situation. If you're a contract worker, right, and you are negotiating with the developer and you have this work, you're uncomfortable making a stink about issues that are important to you because you don't want to compromise your creative relationship with the studio. Bringing in a professional can help ease that burden. It can help get you a better result. It can help, ease the psychological burden of having to have this, conflict with somebody. It's like, just outsource it, get somebody to deal with it. And yeah, it's not free, but look what happened to Mick Gordon, right? He's tried to do all this stuff himself. And at least the picture he painted was, well, I continued to believe in the good faith of these other people. And I continued to trust that they were going to do the right thing. And I put myself out there. And it's the kind of thing that a skilled negotiator wouldn't do. A skilled negotiator is going to hold the other side to exactly what they said they're going to do. And if you get too far out in front of that, things get cut off, and creatives, I think, are less likely to do that. And I understand why, because after you've got your deal, now you have to go back and work with these people. And if you've been super aggressive about it, and so whatever, bring out your bulldog, have your lawyer, go in there, and it's not a huge time commitment for them. And so something that I've been thinking about and experimenting with is, for developers, when they engage with a lawyer, going back to, they have to pay a retainer and then pay this lawyer by the hour. And so it disincentivizes you from sharing all the information that might be relevant. It disincentivizes you from asking all the questions you might have because the clock is ticking. And so finding ways to give developers like a package deal where they pay a fixed price and they get a certain amount of research and advisory services that may not get me fully involved in documenting a transaction or whatever. But if I understand the situation and I need to get on a phone call with somebody to help them negotiate or enforce a contract, the other side, just knowing that this person is represented gives their issue more gravitas. And so it's thinking about providing general counsel services for developers. And what I mean by that is, they pay me some fixed amount based on the size of their project or the size of their studio. And, if they have a research question, I can give them an answer to it. If they have a problem they're worried about, I can help them think about it and get out in front of it. If they think they might want to file a lawsuit, I can help them think through that. And as long as I'm not, responsible for filing that, that would be a separate engagement. But it's like, we could talk about what that might look like. If you receive a lawsuit or a threatening letter or whatever, you can talk about that with me. And all these different issues come at a fixed, predictable price that's targeted for indie developers for me to build relationships with them. That is something that I am definitely looking to do. And it's not something that a lot of lawyers, because a lot of lawyers are just looking to make as much money as possible, whereas I want to be a helpful member of this community. And I also although I have a lot of experience with these legal issues, I don't have a huge reputation in the games industry. And so I have to pay my dues. I have to, write, show, don't tell. Right. And so the way for me to show people, right, for me to make the case that I can add value to developers is to just go out and do it and not talk about it and say blah, 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 blah. And that's how I operate is, put up or shut up. And it's why I've done a bunch of cases representing developers on contingency. Doesn't work for everything, but I had some developers that had their game, their copyright infringed. And so I went after the infringer and got them to pay. And the developer didn't pay me anything for that. I just took a piece of what I recovered from the bad guy. And that's probably a developer would have gotten nothing, because other than the fact that they knew me, they would never have even dreamed of hiring a lawyer to solve this problem. Because they knew me, they got paid a lot of money and they didn't have to. And it was me who ate the risk. And I ate the risk because I looked at the facts and I was like, this is a good case. I can recover on this. And I did. And so that doesn't work with everything, where, if you have a copyright violation or something, there's damages, there's a bad guy to get money from. If you are, trying to organize your business entity for your studio, there's not like a contingency fee arrangement for that sort of thing. But that's where the fixed fees come in. And for me, I come up with packages that are targeted to individual developers, because, I'm at a place in my career where my real goal is to add value to indie developers and to add value to the game development community in general, and not just to be a lawyer and do whatever thing makes me the most money. I expect to be fairly compensated, but that's an offshoot of providing value to people. It's not the end unto itself. The end is rebalancing things for indie devs so that they can do more and better work and not be victims of big business and living hand to mouth.
A long time ago in the industry, my understanding is it was more common for people to, in like developer positions, they would have agents and stuff. Like they didn't do any of their own negotiation. It was a smaller industry, and so it was easier to get a sense of like what that job would entail for an agent. But it's a little bit like that. It's like, it is scary to try to negotiate something yourself. The average person is in no way prepared to truly interpret a contract put together by attorneys at a huge publisher or any publisher. There are a lot of small publishers now, and that comes with its own set of issues. I think small publishers are good to work with, but especially when you can find somebody willing to go, for a set fee, I can do the following for you, and not just take out a big chunk of your savings, hand it to me, and we'll see what comes up. Like, that part's scary. But if you could find somebody willing to work with you on an issue by issue basis, that's a good thing, And
it's another thing that, there are changes that are happening in the legal industry at the same time that make this possible. And so one of the benefits that I have, although I've been practicing law for many years, I have a new firm. And so my new firm is formed in the post-COVID world. And so not only is it formed in the post-COVID world, but as a software developer, I have a much more sophistication than your average lawyer about how to leverage automation and computer tools and microservices and things like this. So unlike a lot of other lawyers out there, I don't have an office, I don't have staff, I don't have all these different things that cost a lot of money and that don't add any value to clients. It's one of the things about the legal world is there's this tremendous amount of elitism about, the best lawyers work at, thus and such of a big name firm. And if you go to that firm's office in the big city, it is a palace in the sky with gold and marble, and it's filled with, junior associates making $200,000 a year, and everything is the finest and the best and whatever. And it's like, none of that adds any value to clients. And hey, if you're Activision and you've got a couple billion, more than a couple, you got billions of dollars coming in, who cares? Whatever. You want the best, you pay for the best. And, whatever. I know folks that work at those firms, and there are things that those firms do that I can't, and so there's going to be certain things and it's one of the things about, somebody with a background like mine is I don't have an ego about saying like, oh, well, I can do everything. Like, I know where my limitations are. And so if you have a case that's going to go before the Supreme Court, you got to get a specialist with that. If you have, a giant, antitrust case, like Microsoft is buying Activision and they're dealing with the FTC. I'm not the guy for that. I'm not the guy for that. There's lawyers at big firms. But I think what a lot of people happen is, well, I don't know what's a good lawyer. I want to make sure I get a good lawyer. And so they'll pay $1,000 an hour to hire some big firm. And the problem with that is not that those people aren't good, but that the two most important factors in any legal representation that you are going to get from anyone is the law and the facts. And your lawyer doesn't have any control over either of those. And so, yes, good legal representation can help you. But what's most important about getting quality legal representation is having somebody that's knows all the facts and is familiar with your whole situation. And so if you are gun shy about having that person run around carte blanche and looking through everything that you do and spending hours on the phone with you because you don't want to pay for it, well, then they can only help you as much as you help them help you. And so a lawyer can't solve an issue or can't address an issue that they don't know about. And so if you have your game and you tend to bring it to a lawyer and there's some component of it that might be patentable, unless you ask the lawyer, hey, is this patentable? They're unlikely to give you an opinion about that. If there's a bunch of things where if you don't ask and you don't know to ask, you aren't going to get the service that you need. And so to some extent, I think of myself, and I used to be in the healthcare field, kind of like a general practitioner. Like you go to your family doctor and they can help you with a lot of different issues and they can be very helpful. And they can also help you triage and connect, if you get cancer or whatever, well, they're not going to treat you for that. They're going to say, hey, talk to this fellow. He's a cancer specialist, and they're going to help coordinate your care with them. That's part of what I'm thinking about with these predictable general counsel packages is, hey, there's going to be some things that can come up where I may not be the right person for it. And if that happens, A, I know what the limits of my expertise are, and B, I know folks that can handle that, and I know the right questions to ask them and the right information to provide them with. And so, I can make those connections and identify where those working with more specialized lawyers is going to make sense and help clients control the costs when they do. And so it's another way to add value to folks is to understand, like, hey, even if I'm getting this fixed fee, there's going to be a lot of things that I can deal with. There's going to be a lot of problems I can help you solve. But there's definitely things that are outside of my area of expertise, or they are a very, particular esoteric area of the law where you need to have a specialist in it. And I'm familiar with what those things are, and it's how I run my practice is to refer things out. A good example of that is patent stuff. I can help you spot, like, oh, this might be patentable. This might be, or there might be a patent that you could be in violation of. But if you want to file a patent, that's a very specialized area, and I would refer that out to somebody that just does that. But that person isn't going to help you organize your business and set it up. They're not going to help you with fundraising. They're not going to help you with a bunch of different, sort of strategic considerations as well. And so there's a lot of things that I can offer as somebody that's run a business, raised money for it, and sold it, that the average lawyer, or even a very, very good specialist, isn't going to be able to have that experience with it. And so there's a lot of things I feel like I can add value to indie developers and small developers. I should say I also represent, although video games is really where my personal focus is, there are a lot of the same issues come up with tech startups, and other small businesses and things like that. So I represent folks like that as well.
That's something that's interesting about law compared to medicine. Obviously, my wife, if she wanted to stop seeing, general cases and start doing surgery, for example, I mean, there's a very complicated process, time intensive to get that done. Whereas in law, it's important how you define your practice, but it's less formal, right? I mean, you can kind of drift towards what you find yourself doing frequently and doing well. And you can kind of slide into a specialty and just sort of become that guy if it's something that's a good fit, right?
Well, it's an interesting thing about lawyer ethics. And so one of the things that in a lot of states, if not most states, is you actually can't promote yourself as a lawyer and say that you are, an expert or a specialist in one particular category, even though most lawyers are specialists in one category. In terms of lawyer advertising, in a lot of cases, you can't come out and say like, I am this or I am that. And so in terms of legal training, lawyers are trained to be generalists, and by ethical standards, you have to sort of notionally, what most people do is say, well, these are the things that I do. And you don't say, well, I'm a specialist or an expert in these things. I think there's probably, some political reason for why that ethical rule exists, because, right, the reality is that most lawyers are specialists, because that is what is most highly compensated in the legal world. And so becoming if you want to make a lot of money as a lawyer, obviously the best way is to have deep-pocketed clients. But after that, in terms of, skill sets, a lot of lawyers choose to be specialists in one narrow area of the law, because that is very valuable. And it's the same way for medicine. If you are a cancer specialist or a heart specialist or whatever, those people tend to make more money than the family practice physicians. And, like I said, I expect to be fairly compensated, but, the goal here is not for me to build a financial empire. The goal here is for me to be useful and to add value to developers, because I believe in the community. I believe in what developers are doing. I really, right, as a gamer, I want to see, more variety and more innovation. I want to see the people who create these experiences be rewarded for that. And I don't want to see, the game industry become what happens to a lot of industries, where there's only 5 companies or 6 companies, and that's the whole game, and there's nothing else. And everybody else, if you want to play, you have to play their game, or you have to build their game, and there's not another game in town. I worry about that someday, even with this golden age. I mean, the reason why there's all this money being invested is because those companies want to have monopoly power over the industry. And it's one of the things that I've thought about, and I'm not in a position to really take action about. But certainly I would like to be a part of organizing independent developers. If the big companies aren't going to allow a space for independent developers to do their thing, well, then they should make their own space that serves, right. Microsoft has a platform where they sell games and it serves their interest. Nintendo has a platform where they sell games, it serves their interest. Indies could build their own platform. And so indies could build their own platform, talking about some of the labor and capital issues we were talking about before, like, developers don't need a factory. We don't need raw materials for things. And so really the only thing that creatives get from a big publisher and a big studio is money to pay for food and a roof over their head. They're really, it's not like, it's not like the factory where, like, if you are fed and you're paid and you're taken care of, you still can't build cars. Coal miners, same thing. Most of the work that was done in the 20th century, but game development is different in that if you are fed and you have a place to live and you don't even need to have your own computer. Like, you can go to the library, and use a computer and build games there. And so, I think that I am trying to encourage the people to think deeply about how radical of a shift this is in the way that work is done and the way that commerce happens, at least in America. And I think that those underlying forces favor developers in ways that they're not capitalizing on right now.
I would agree. I think that's true. It's an area for a lot of thought, a lot of collaboration, and we can see some really cool stuff, I think. You and I started having conversation. We followed each other for a while, I think, but we started discussing stuff on Twitter when this whole Superman demo thing unfolded, where somebody had like taken something from itch that somebody had just put out there going, hey, look at my demo, sold it on Steam. A lot of people have heard the story, especially if you're active on game dev Twitter. And it became a complicated thing, which is sort of resolved now, but you had put out there that it should be a wake-up call that indies should be looking at intellectual property issues. So removing some of the complications from that, he was in another country. We don't know where the person who took the game was. Let's say they were local. Let's say there wasn't the issue of Superman also to deal with. If that had just been a run-of-the-mill indie situation, how could they have done that differently to hopefully ensure a better outcome, say if it hadn't been resolved and it needed to move forward? How should they have sort of protected themselves?
The way to protect yourself is to, file for copyrights on your game. Now, this gets in, and I'll touch very briefly on this, a little bit of a complication, because there's a bunch of ways to copyright your game and components in the game. You can copyright the binary executable, but what about your characters? What about the music? What about, design elements and all different things? And so you may want to think about registering those things separately so that they could be sold to other people. But the key thing is, if you don't register your copyright, well, actually, the Supreme Court recently ruled that you have to register before you can bring an action against somebody, but you don't have to register before they infringe. If you do it before you publish or within 90 days of the publication, is you get attorney's fees, which, if you didn't have this registration, you would have to pay your attorney out of the damages that you recovered from the bad guy. And so having attorney's fees awarded separately gives you more leverage in the negotiation. You also get statutory damages. And so that's written into the law. There's a formula about what the damages are worth. And you could get more than that, but you get at least that by statute. If you don't have the timely registration and you try to recover on these things, then you don't have the attorney fee component and you don't get the statutory damages. And so you may find that, well, gosh, the infringement is really clear, but there's not enough damages that you can really sink your teeth into to get a lawyer to represent you on contingency, because they're like, I don't know what the damages are worth, and I'm not going to get attorney's fees. Even if I win, I got to kick it out of your damages. And if they're not big enough, then why would we take this case? And so what happens to a lot of people that don't register is, even if you catch somebody red-handed, it's like, well, they stole your game, but they only sold $10,000 of it. Well, bringing a federal copyright case, it's going to cost more than that. And so you may find that, like, you just can't do anything because there's not enough damages to justify you paying a lawyer. There's not enough damages to justify a lawyer taking it on contingency. And so you end up just being victimized. And if you had the copyright registration, you would come into that situation much stronger. It's much easier to get a lawyer involved. It's much easier to justify either paying for the services yourself or getting a lawyer to take the risk. If you can see, oh, well, the statute says I'm going to get $250,000 here. And so if I win, I know I'm gonna get that, versus no registration. I win, maybe we get $5, because that's all the damages that we can prove. Register your copyrights. If you want to talk to me about that, you'd have to pay me to actually go and register your copyright for you, but I can help you folks think through the issues about what might be copyrightable, what they might have in their game that might be someone else's copyright, that might be an issue for them. And I'm happy to talk with developers about that issue.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. And I agree. It was a wake up call that, we're not generally thinking about that day to day, because we're just going, I want to make games. Especially this guy who wasn't even planning to sell the game. It was like, look what I can do. And, you still want to control people's access to it. And as much as I love itch, there are some predators scrolling through itch. I've made small game jam projects with my son, who was like 5 in one example. We made a little train game together. Woo woo, you can ride this train around a track. And God help me if somebody hadn't stolen it, put it up on another website, and monetized ads. They stole a game from my child. So there's no level that these people won't sink to take free work and run. It is unfortunately somewhat common, more so than I realized. So definitely worth thinking about that. Time's kind of running out. Speaking of specialties, how did you land on Pico 8?
I landed on Pico 8 just because, I've been to the whole retro thing, and I really thought that Pico 8 was a really comfortable environment for me to develop in, and a comfortable environment for people to learn in. And it's one of the other things I do is I teach intro to game development course for kids. It's one of the things I've done with my game studio, Sun Bear Interactive, is I have this course where I teach young kids how to, variables and conditional expressions and functions and loops and stuff like this, how to make a simple game. And Pico 8 is really perfect for that. And I just think it's such an accessible platform. And it's a project that I really support. I think other people should do it. And I support Lexalawful and Zep in everything that they do. And I really kind of want to be an evangelist for Pico 8 and the stuff they do, because I as somebody that really tried to learn computing and game development and programming a lot, this Pico 8 really had the right mix of power and flexibility and ease of use and community and all these different things that really made it possible for me to get better at game development. And so I can't recommend it enough for anybody that wants to learn how to code, anyone who wants to learn how to make games. Yeah, you can do more like fancy stuff with Unity and Unreal, but like the engine's doing all that stuff for you. Like you really, that you're building more foundational skills using Pico 8, and maybe the things that you produce aren't going to be quite as impressive to the uneducated or unknowledgeable consumer. But I think the learning that you get there is more foundational than what you can get with a bigger engine, where it's more kind of results oriented than Pico 8.
It's true. I talk to a lot of Unity people, Unreal people, and it's not uncommon for me to check their Twitter feed and see just mind-blowing demos and stuff. But on some level, it's like, you probably know what you're doing, but for all I know, you downloaded this straight off the asset store and you've just got a GIF of it running. Whereas like you have impressive Pico 8 graphics, GIFs on your profile. And I go, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Like there's no question. He knows what he's doing with Pico 8, which is cool. So as we kind of wrap up, let people know where to follow you, your work, anything you want.
Sure. Probably the best way to get in touch with me is either Twitter, where I am at Proton Person, and that's my handle on Twitter. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is John Loiterman. I'm one of a kind. There's no other John Loitermans out there. So it's Loiterman, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I have a through the LinkedIn, you can schedule a free consultation with me through Calendly. And at least for now, I am offering free consultations to indie devs. And so you can schedule a meeting with a lawyer and sit down and talk to one for 30, 45 minutes. And as my time and schedule allows, I'm going to do those obligation-free, cost-free. I hope that some folks choose to sign up for more services, but I understand that a lot of them won't. And so I hope you check me out on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and reach out and ask questions. And don't be a stranger. Don't be shy. Your game is important. And I hope you choose to let me help you protect it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking to me for free of charge. And I hope we can check in again soon.
Absolutely. This was fantastic. Thanks again for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I would definitely be down to do this again on another occasion. So
very cool. Thanks, John. Okay, as always, if you enjoy Game Dev Breakdown, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening right now. We have articles, show notes, and more available at CodeWritePlay.com. You can reach out on Twitter at CodeWritePlay, at GameDevPod, and me at Mechatodzilla with 1D and 2 Ls. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our sponsors. Show them some love, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks, everybody.